Hello and welcome to The Nation. I'm ELANE Noor Abdullah. Now, retirement used to mean slowing down, but today it's much more complex conversation. As life expectancy rises and the economy evolves, what does raising the retirement age really mean for different generations? Now, to discuss this further, I'm joined by AMIR RAHIM, Managing Director of ISYAM Possible Solutions. AMIR, lovely to have you in the studio. It's a broad-ranging topic and there's a lot to dive into. So let me get to the first question. We're talking about helping to set the context. Why is increasing the retirement age not as simple as a black and white issue? And especially since we are heading towards an aging nation, people who are retiring don't have enough savings for retirement. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks for having me, ELANE. I think when we talk about the retirement age, at least in the Malaysian context, there's a lot of emphasis about sufficiency of retirement, the aging nation scenario, but I think people are forgetting the root cause of why all of these things are happening. We are, in essence, a victim of our own success. Life expectancy in Malaysia has risen. We are now living longer, albeit some people would argue less healthier with the current discussions, but we're living longer. The average life expectancy is about 75 years old, and therefore that's causing us to have multiple generations alive in the same time space. So what used to be maybe 2, maximum 3 generations alive in the same space, today in Malaysia you're talking about in a single family between 3 to 4 generations, and in places where life expectancies are higher, like America, they even see about 7 generations alive at the same time. So ultimately, it's a question of resources. Is there enough to go around that every generation is able to survive and thrive?
No, and this conversation has been long in our national narrative. We've known of this because we're, like I said, not the first nation to hit this. We've seen examples of, more, like the economies that are, for example, like Japan or those who are our neighboring countries that have already experienced this. And these are things that we knew were impending. And therefore, the solution may not be that simple. We've seen stories of how some case studies have activated certain sort of like policies and ideas, but success rates, differ from location to location. So what does this increase in retirement age mean for the different generations that you've just outlined? Because, like you said, some are 3 to 4, some are up to 7.
Yeah. So I think in order for us to be able to make a decision as our own country, as a Malaysia, we must look at our demographics. I think the DOSM demographics, the population estimates, sees us increasing our population to about 40 million, if I'm not mistaken, by 2040, 2050. And after that, we would taper down. Life expectancy, we will actually start to diminish in population, actually. Now, what does that mean? That means now we can't avoid it. To be very frank, let me make it very clear. I think the idea of increasing the retirement age is a much needed thing eventually, given our demographics today. But we also need to consider the other end of the spectrum. Like you said, there are multiple generations that are going to be affected. And I generally would classify this, again, this is a bit simplistic, broad strokes. Think of it as from somebody who's just starting out work, maybe 0 to 10 years experience, to somebody 11 to 30 years experience, to somebody who's 30 and above. Because eventually, it's a 40-plus year career if you look at the current retirement age at 60. So when you look at 58, 60. So when you look at those things, how does every generation handle this transition? So, and we can't look at the dynamics of the workforce in isolation. There are many things that are also happening. Everything from education, from healthcare, even the AI boom is affecting all of these different generational workforce. So if you ask me, if you talk about the older generation, yes, you know that they don't have enough money. That's well documented in Malaysia. They don't have enough money. So increasing the retirement age is most likely a positive from a government standpoint. It's a positive because then government doesn't have to bear this burden. But it could also be a positive for the middle and younger in a way that they're no longer sandwich families. They're not the only one expected to pay for that aging parent or the aging aunt because technically they can work longer. But at the same time, you're also, for the other 2 generations, the younger broad stroke generations, you are actually lessening the opportunity.
Yep, correct.
Because they can't climb the career ladder as fast if you don't do it properly.
Yep.
Yeah? The younger ones have less opportunity, the older ones also can't. And in Malaysia, unfortunately, our income growth is tied to those promotions and these positions.
And also those experiences that you supposedly clocked in terms of number of years. And already, like you said, we're talking about the leveling up that's going to be difficult. But as it is right now, if you're coming out into the workforce, you're already finding it hard to find a job that's going to be able to either be in line with whatever that you're studying, or you're just looking for alternatives, like a lot of people are turning to entrepreneurship versus, going and studying, working in a field that they studied in. So those are already happening as we speak. But with the retirement age, I think there's just escalated concern among the various generations or various age groups that we're talking about. Now, raising the retirement age may help older Malaysians, as you mentioned earlier, save a little bit more, but is it enough to solve the bigger problem of the insufficient EPF savings? Because this is where all that conversation has, erupted recently with, the change in EPF that was essentially suggested. So a lot of people are thinking like, oh, what's my future going to look like?
Yeah. So to be honest, I personally don't think so, because at the end of the day, what EPF is well run. Let's be clear. I think Malaysia's pension fund is one of the best run in the world.
We are very fortunate.
We're very fortunate to have that. But I think the challenge is that people aren't saving enough, even with EPF. They aren't having enough long of a time to accumulate enough wealth for them to last in their retirement years.
No, it's also because of cost of living, right? So whatever that you had thought that when you first started off you save, it seemed like enough. In those days, they said, 1 million should be enough for you to retire. No, that's like far cry from what you would need in the next, if you're retiring in the next 10, 20 years, you probably need about 2 to 3 million already. That's what people are saying, depending on how long your lifespan is. And like you said, we're working against ourselves, right? Because our lifespan has increased. So even if you have like 1, 2 or 3 million, if you're living longer, that may not be sufficient as well. Now, so you mentioned intergenerational equity.
Yeah.
How do we strike a balance between securing the financial future of seniors, which is what we're trying to do right now with the raising of the minimum retirement age, while still ensuring career opportunities, as I mentioned, for those that are coming into the workforce, whether it's the young, whether it's the mid-careers? Is there actually a path?
Okay. So I think we need to have a more nuanced approach. So I would argue that there's a few things we need to consider. And again, I'm saying this with more of a policymaker hat as opposed to what companies would do or individuals would do. I would argue that when we talk about the retirement age, we need to have a phase model approach. Fine, I think you can't run away. The retirement age has to go up, because if not, you would end up burdening society, families, government itself, if these people can't afford to pay for themselves when they're older. But what that then means is we need a phase model approach. So for example, yes, increase the retirement age, but force companies to do things like succession planning. Force companies to, you can stay on, but you're no longer the director or the C-suite or the head of department. You are transition out.
You need to take a step back, a bit like a senior minister role.
Right. I mean, to be very frank, I think my late uncle told me, because he was in the Malaysian army, and when they were still part, even pre-independent. So the UK used to have this model, I don't know if it's still in place, where retired generals would then be demoted to captains, retiring before they retire fully. So I think we need to institute something similar. We need a phase model where, yes, you can work beyond 60, 65, but the company must proactively exit you out.
Yep.
Again, depending on the skill set and whatnot.
And I think it is, it's balancing the best of both worlds, because you still want to be able to draw on wisdom that experience teaches you that nothing else can teach you. You may be able to read, you may be able to have a lot of exposure, but being in a sort of like pressure cooker environment and going through it yourself creates different kind of characters that the young would need, sort of like that kind of mentorship that would be helpful. And like you said, I think it's that phased approach that's going to be helpful to benefit the workforce and hopefully actually accelerate its growth. Now, how real then is the risk of career stagnation as we're talking about this conversation, right? For younger employees, if seniors remain longer in their roles, if there's no, like you said, those phased approaches, could this contribute to, we've already seen this, brain drain of talents leaving?
Oh, definitely. As it is, I actually see two issues. I actually see two big issues. A lot of people talk about the brain drain issue, but a lot of people are not talking about the upskilling issues. Or rather, there's three dimensions to this. When you talk about the older generation, you have to remember, when you talk about as a policymaker, it's not about talking about the people who are able to adapt. it's also talking about the people who can't adapt, whether regardless of which generation they come from. So when you talk about the seniors, you have to ask yourself, how many of them are able to adapt in a digital world? How many of them have the skill? Because the workplace dynamics have shifted.
Yeah.
We are now in an always on demand workplace environment. Our WhatsApps are connected. Companies give you laptops and internet connectivity and expect you to respond whenever they call. You know, work-life balance is a very different game today compared to back then. And again, it depends on industry. So there's that scenario for the elderly. For the middle, there's the question of brain drain. If I can't go up, why am I here? Might as well, if my upward mobility is affected, let me go somewhere else where I'm appreciated. And again, given that it's now a global marketplace scenario, that will not be Malaysia in some cases. And this is where we see all these middle guys going off. Now, for the younger ones, the challenge that I'm now seeing, with the advent of AI, there's a lot of dumbing down, unfortunately. Again, not all. There's gems in every generation, but majority, again, as a policymaker, you're not catering to the best, you're catering to everyone. How do you bring everybody along, push them up together so that we as a nation come back together? What I notice with the younger generation is there's this dependency on AI, digital tools, where they have a distinct advantage, but at the same time, they're not being given the experience in order to properly navigate and use these tools properly. You know, a person, I would say an AI prompting by somebody who's experienced in a middle management position is much better than somebody from an entry level, without getting into too much detail. But there's some of these challenges now faced by each generation.
No, and it's very true because as you mentioned, I think you highlighted sort of like the key sort of like pain points that both as a policymaker and whoever that's in the sort of workforce see that it's happening at the moment. Now, some argue that the younger generation already face rising living costs, which we all know. We hear of it because the younger generation are very vocal on social media, so you can hear all the grievances aired in public as well. Whether it's living costs, whether it's childcare, whether it's housing pressures, because those are the three main things that you're trying to establish when you're like starting out after you sort of leave that schooling environment. Let's talk about, would extending this retirement age actually indirectly worsen these struggles? Because it seems like it's going to.
Yeah, I believe so, because again, income stagnation in Malaysia. So this is where actually, as a policymaker, I think there's a couple of dimensions to this. Let me first start off by addressing, okay, number one, we have been working on a system where there's only a certain number of seats in every company, even in government.
Correct.
And unless somebody dies or retires,
yes,
that seat's filled up and therefore you don't get promoted and your income is stagnant. Yeah. You know, unfortunately, our income stagnation is very well documented, hasn't kept the pace with our economic growth. Our wages have not kept the pace. Now, as a policymaker then, let me just finish that thought. Because of that, I strongly do believe, because we have that other aspect of our macro dynamics, our social demographics, which is low fertility. A lot of people are choosing not to have babies. Yeah. And I personally hypothesize that that's also because of the challenges of trying to earn money, trying to work two jobs, trying to also pay for maybe elderly generations that didn't plan their retirement as well. You know, so there's all these sandwich family issues that are also propping up because we're in transition. You're having younger or middle that are now being forced to even supplement incomes of their families. Okay. Now, with that being said, I take the position that as a policymaker, you need to widen the seat base. You need to force companies to create more opportunities across the board. Now, does that sound a bit socialist? Maybe. But I think we need to get companies to start thinking. Again, the best already do this. They need to start thinking about succession planning. They need to start thinking about, okay, if this guy leaves, because like I said, if you're not training the younger generation to be more experienced and you only depend on the middle, what happens when this guy retires or this guy leaves for a better job? Then your sustainability of your company becomes a problem as well.
It's like how we all worry about when we have sports and we have nobody that's taking over our sports icon, similar for companies. So
I would argue, because of that, succession planning. Forcing companies to think about succession planning is a very important thing. How can this be done? Public listed companies could potentially be made to file what are their succession planning for C-suite levels, all the way up to 3 or 5 levels down. maybe even for you to apply for a loan and get preferential rates, because we don't just want to target the public listed company. One person actually pointed this out to me, May. If you keep pushing this all on public listed companies, you know, we're not going to want to be listed. But private companies could be made to do this by virtue of bank loan applications, preferential interest rates, if you have succession plans. And again, they don't have to be super complex, but you're trying to get the majority of the companies to think about it.
The incentives for you to do so should be in place so that it encourages. I mean, like how when we were talking about climate change in terms of sustainability practices as well, those were things in the past that we thought that was impossible to do. Like, these are some things that are potentially something that can be thought of. Now, instead of a hard extension to 65, which is what we're looking at, would phased retirement models, such as reduced hours, mentorship or advisory roles, be that option on policy level?
Yeah, again, that is, I think, the main thing I would advocate for if we move towards 65 or 70, as some people are now saying, for a new retirement age. There needs to be that mandate that fine, they can stay, but companies must look at phasing them out. Must open opportunities, must be made to have succession plan.
I think we were having this conversation earlier that you said that, you know, it needs to be at the policy level. It needs to have some kind of like authority that comes with, you know, certain sort of like...
We need rules, like very simply, board positions. Today, you can hold a board position in a public listed company for up to 12 years. You can have 5 concurrent public listed board positions and countless other private company board positions. How are you actually able to function if you're holding so many? You know, so let's divest this. I mean, this is a bit controversial. I don't know whether anyone would have the guts to do this because you're talking about other people's rice bowl. You're talking about the elites. I would even argue this is a big game changer. Public CEO pay salary disclosure ratios, meaning to say, if you are of a certain percentage, if your salary as the CEO is so much higher than the lowest paid person in your company, and your company is profitable, shouldn't something be done?
Yep.
Yeah, by right, we should mandate these type of things, because again, you want companies, as for me, it's about outward mobility and spreading the wealth to a certain extent, making sure it trickles down to our people. So that would then entail for you to force companies to think about succession planning, to think about how they're distributing the earnings that they're making.
I think at the end of the day, I feel that there needs to be some kind of accountability for managing this, because there will always be what it looks like taking advantage of those that are just coming into the market, and therefore they have no choice, and therefore they have to take whatever it comes their way in order for them to make those strides of, like, you know, earning their stripes as executives that have had experience to be able to jump to the next level. But like you said, the gap is massive, and how do we close that gap? Because it's causing a huge ripple effect, not just for those who have. The have-nots are not just have-nots, it's just like nobody has anything. So how can the government better manage this situation? I think this is the next question, right? If they are still proceeding to raise the minimum retirement age.
I think, like I said, I think we need to look and acknowledge that the retirement age is not just the retirement age.
It's not just the number.
Yeah. It's not just the number.
Right.
It's how are you deploying it. And that's where the phase model, that's where succession planning mandates. And again, these things we also want to stop ourselves from getting into this problem where government gets too involved in business, because how would you know what's best for the company to a certain extent? But I do think that, again, we must acknowledge the role of government is to bring everybody along, not just the best one. The best ones are already doing these things that we're talking about.
Yep.
You know, they already have succession plans. They probably have their own HR policy about what they're doing. But how do we bring the rest, the SMEs, the guys who don't want to do it? Yeah, because it's wealth transfer at the end of the day. Because again, it's an argument for resources with multiple generations living at the same time. How do we better distribute some of these things?
And we want to make this like we mentioned earlier, where everybody sort of is part of that whole solution, and avoiding the brain drain or avoiding feeling hopeless in this situation because they feel that their voices are not heard, and therefore you look for alternatives elsewhere. And that seems to be the easiest solution right now. To be
very frank, if it wasn't for me being given opportunities when I was younger to go overseas, I probably would not be where I'm at today. But again, how many of those opportunities today exist here in Malaysia with Malaysian companies? Because again, how much experience can you get if you're constantly being squeezed? If the young, especially for the entry level, actually out of all three generations, I'm actually more worried about the younger ones.
For sure.
Because if they are not given the room to grow that experience, they are forever trapped. And if we don't do something about it, and when the middle becomes the older generation, who takes over? Because all of this, we're not in a vacuum. It's not Malaysia versus, it's not the Malaysian workforce fighting against each other. It's the Malaysian workforce fighting against competition from Indonesia, India, America. And even as we discuss these things, from a government standpoint, how are you making sure these people that even if they do choose to go overseas, how do they come back? Because you've got all these situations where the best of our minds are being taken away by these countries, and an age where they are having children, or at an age where they are just establishing their career, putting down roots. And then you really have a problem because it's our economic productivity as a whole. That's
right. And like you said, if you're talking about the next generation taking over, it becomes a weak link that you don't have anything to sort of like, there's no structural foundation there to support it going forward. Now, beyond retirement age, what other structural reforms? I think you mentioned salary transparency, but maybe there's financial literacy programs or like inheritance reforms that you touched on.
Yeah, so these are things that I've mentioned in one of my articles because I don't think enough, I think a lot of people just focuses on the retirement age, but there's a lot of things we need to do because again, we are in transition already. It's happening already. You've got people today who have, as much as a lot of people are debating against, why is the RMK proposal saying that I can't take out my EPF money? And that's true if you are financially literate. That's a very unfair thing to happen to you. But you also have to remember, again, government's catering to everybody. We also have cases where the fella takes out all 300,000 of his EPF retirement, and next thing you know, he spends it on a lavish wedding or a house that's not even right for him per se, him or her, and he finishes off that money, and he ends up becoming a burden to their family members. And that's if the family wants to keep him. If the family doesn't, then he ends up becoming a burden for government. You're already hearing all these stories of elderly abandonment. That's why we're talking about it. Again, all these things are interconnected towards resource. How are we making sure every generation has a fair share to develop and thrive?
So let me jump into, if you had to propose one bold systemic solution beyond just retirement age, what would it be in closing?
Honestly, I don't think they would do this, but the CEO retirement, the CEO disclosure, and probably salary transparency laws. Because again, it's about clearing the board. It's about making sure because again, when you talk about the highest of the high that would be affected by these policies, these are people who have made their money, who probably most likely their retirements are not at threat. But if you now force them to let go and start to succession plan, you are building the next generation. Again, more and more opportunities open up. So I'm so sorry, if you're a CEO, your company is profitable, shouldn't you make room for the next generation? You're not going to live forever either. It's time to give back.
Yes. Right? It's time to give back. Thank you so much, Amir, for sharing your thoughts. And hopefully we'll see these progressive reforms happening within this amount of time that we can actually see that actual results. Now, the debate on raising Malaysia's retirement age touches on more than just economics. It's about equity, opportunity, and the intergenerational balance we just spoke about. Now, as we move forward, these conversations will be essential in shaping policies that safeguard not only financial security, but also the well-being of Malaysians across the country. Amir, I'm ELANE. Thanks for watching, and be sure to follow us for conversations on issues that matter. Pleasure.
Thank you for having me.